just £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the Middle East is on the brink of a region-wide war as Israel promises a severe response to Iran's showering of 200 ballistic missiles into the region's only democracy. Now more than ever, Israel needs our support. The Labour Party's #1 benefactor, Lord Ali, is under investigation for alleged non-registration of interests by the Lord Standards Commissioner. More Danegate trouble emerges for Starmer. As I suggested last week, the Prime Minister is benefiting from a tax loophole on his gifts and freebies that would cost him nearly £50,000 unless he pays them back, and he's begun to do that. Plus, as the Tory party conference draws to a close, the final four contenders addressed the party membership. But who came out on top? State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most forthright panel, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Sir John Redwood, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Cameron Walker.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. For the top stories now from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister's confirms there will be no return to freedom of movement in any reset of relations between the UK and the European Union. Sir Keir Starmer's been speaking at a press conference in Brussels, where he is meeting European Union chiefs with a promise to put the Brexit years behind us and form a closer relationship with the bloc. It's his first visit to Brussels as Prime Minister.
Now, of course, there will be issues which are difficult to resolve, and on areas on which we will stand firm. There will be no return to freedom of movement, no return to the customs union, no return to the single market. But we will find constructive ways to work together and deliver for the British people.
Meanwhile, it's emerged Sakir's paying back more than £6,000 worth of gifts and hospitality received since he became Prime Minister. Downing Street's confirmed he's covering the costs of 6 Taylor Swift tickets, 4 to the races and a clothing rental agreement with a high-end designer favoured by his wife, Lady Victoria Starmer. It comes after Sakir and other cabinet members who vowed to clean up British politics faced weeks of criticism for accepting tens of thousands of pounds worth of freebies from wealthy donors. President Biden says he does not support strikes on Iran's nuclear sites in response to its missile attack against Israel. Iran launched over 180 ballistic missiles at Israel last night, which the United States president previously called ineffective. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows that Iran would face consequences, with some analysts suggesting Israel's response could be more forceful this time, potentially targeting Iran's nuclear or oil facilities. Joe Biden has hinted at additional sanctions against Iran. Now, the Conservative leadership candidates have reflected on their general election defeat in their final speeches at the party conference in Birmingham. Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are all appealing to members in their bids to replace Rishi Sunak. MPs will now whittle down to 2 candidates, with Tory members to vote on afterwards, with the winner being announced on the 2nd of November. And finally, the Prince and Princess of Wales have met an aspiring teenage photographer with a rare and aggressive form of cancer after inviting her to take pictures at William's Windsor Castle investiture ceremony. The Princess, who has recently completed chemotherapy treatment herself and is a keen amateur photographer, was pictured hugging 16-year-old Liz from Harrogate. In a personal message on social media, William and Catherine said, "A pleasure to meet with Liz at Windsor today, a talented young photographer whose creativity and strength has inspired us both. Thank you for sharing your photos and story with us." Well, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Cameron Walker. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Israel is often described by its critic as the great colonizer of the Middle East, the one Jewish state in the world, the oasis in the democratic desert, the country that has no choice but to win all of its wars or cease to exist, is accused of being the aggressive imperialist. But if the events of the last 24 hours or so have proved anything, it is that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard is the real colonizer of the Middle East. It began in 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini led the Islamic Revolution. This condemned a nation of great history and promise to an existence of misery and backwardness. Since then, Iran has ruined the lives of its citizens at home. One of its former presidents, one who died in a helicopter crash, who was known as the Butcher of Tehran because he ordered so many mass political executions. But abroad, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard has become an increasingly expansionist, imperialist and colonizing power. Israel's critics want you to believe this war is Israel versus innocent Palestinians. But in truth, this is a war between Israel and Iran, between the West and the burgeoning axis of Iran and its allies. Iran has proxies in nearly every region in the Middle East, in Gaza in the form of Hamas, in Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah, in Yemen in the form of the Houthis, but also in Iraq and Syria. What is the common denominator in all of these places? Theocratic fascism for all of its subjects. On the BBC last night, this was said.
We've been in this cause for 12 months now of constantly red lines being crossed, mostly by the Israelis. The Hezbollah and Iran have played it fairly rationally, trying to be very cautious in how they respond, trying to leave off-ramps where they could. The Netanyahu government has kind of lost the opportunity at every sort of junction to use an off-ramp that was given to them.
Well, that was absolute madness, but never mind. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a regime of religious fanaticism. It uses proxies to spread its extreme millenarian view of Islam. It kills people. It pays its proxies to kill people, to try and kill people who live in Israel. But why should we in the UK care about Iran or the Middle East? Is it a small country a long way away, as Chamberlain said of Czechoslovakia? Well, in March, a London-based Iranian journalist was stabbed outside his home, with the suspects fleeing the United Kingdom immediately afterwards. It was also the Islamic Republic that put a fatwa on the head of British author Salman Rushdie, which culminated in his near murder in 2022. Things come back to Britain, in addition to instability, having all sorts of risks in the Middle East, where, of course, we get a great deal of oil from. But Iran's desire to harm extends far beyond Israel. Iran is an enemy of the West, and Israel is fighting this war on our behalf. It is our proxy. If Iran wins, we cannot be so naive to think that it will end with Israel. We are all in this war together, which is why we must support Israel in its war against the true colonizer of the Middle East, the Islamic Republic of Iran. As always, let me know your views, melmog@gbnews.com. But I'm pleased now to be joined by the Israeli-Lebanese activist, Jonathan El-Khoury, who is in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, what is happening in Tel Aviv at the moment after the 200 ballistic missiles rained down recently?
Well, Jake, thank you very much for having me. You're now catching me in the middle of Rosh Hashanah dinner. This is a Jewish holiday to celebrate the New Year's. And this is something that I've been invited to at my friend's house because I'm a Christian and I'm a non-Jew. And this is how we continue on living. This is something that is really particular for us. The Islamic Republic of Iran yesterday crossed another major line while escalating the situation, sending about 180 ballistic missiles towards all of Israel's citizens. I don't know if you noticed that, but Israel is Jewish. They are Christians, they're Muslims, they're Bedouins, and all of us were a target by the Islamic Republic of Iran yesterday. And the IDF and the Israeli Defense Forces did everything in its power in order to make sure that none of any civilians would be harmed. And this is something that we are seeing consistently since the beginning of this war. You said it right at the beginning, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not just fighting against Israel by its proxies. I was originally born in Lebanon, and I had to flee Lebanon in 2001 because of Hezbollah's occupation to South Lebanon after Israel withdrew from that territory. And that's something that I grew up with. I grew up being persecuted by the PLO at the beginning and then by Hezbollah. And this is something that you realize to understand around the world, that a lot of people don't really understand what's happening here in the Middle East. And I want to thank you for your inputs and for bringing that up to the stage.
Well, thank you. And thank you for interrupting a very important celebratory dinner. And what an honour to be invited by a family to join them for the New Year celebration. But what I wanted to ask you about is the misconception that there seems to be that nice Palestinians are being persecuted by the State of Israel, whereas the truth is that terrorists backed by Iran are trying to kill people in Israel and destroy the Israeli state. And these 180 ballistic missiles prove that, don't they? They remind people of the reality. And in this way, perhaps Iran's overplayed its hand because it's shown people what it really is.
Yeah, well, we saw that the Islamic Republic of Iran yesterday decided to join by itself to this ongoing war that was launched by its proxies. Hamas started this war on October 7th, infiltrating Israeli territories, killing about 1,200 innocent children, women, men, executing people in the streets, also kidnapping more than 240 Israeli civilians and foreigners that were whether partying or at their homes with pajamas. There are still 101 captives in captivity in Gaza that are held by Hamas terrorist organization. On October 8th, Hezbollah, that is another Iranian proxy in Lebanon, decided also to start firing rockets and harming the majority of the people who are living in the northern of Israel, where about more than 80,000 Israelis are being dislocated since October 8th because of Hezbollah's aiming at their homes and at their bases. And that's something that also, again, you can see by the Israeli response, whether it was to Gaza, whether it was to Hezbollah territories inside of Lebanon, that at the end of the day, every target that Israel hit is a target that is responding to against a terror organization. For example, in Lebanon, you have Lebanese politicians, and because I'm Lebanese myself, I follow a lot of what's going on inside of Lebanon, and because I had to flee, I'm really concerned for, you know, this country that used to be called the Switzerland of the Middle East, the pearl of the world, that now a lot of politicians in Lebanon since October 8th are saying, why are we getting ourselves involved in a war that has nothing to do with any Lebanese cause? This is what you can hear about in Lebanon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'd better let you get back to your dinner, but thank you so much for joining me this evening. Well, I'm now joined by Iranian-born investigative journalist Potkin Azamir. Thank you so much for coming in. Has Iran now shot its bolt? Is there more that Iran can do beyond these 180 ballistic missiles?
Iran doesn't seem to have the economy for a war, and I think it seems that Israel has more options at its disposal. It's right on top of the intelligence war with Iran. It has a superior air force, and it can target Iran's oil installations, infrastructures, and in the worst-case scenario, even the nuclear installations. But Iran has always been relying on its proxy groups, and the thing is, the proxy groups, for the first time, are being dismantled.
And it was quite stupid, wasn't it, of the US government a year ago to release $6 billion to the Iranian government, which it's had the ability to spend on arms and on its proxies.
Oh, it gave them a lifeline. I mean, Iran was down on its knees, and suddenly they got this handful of cash. They couldn't believe it themselves. And to make it worse, I remember John Kerry was being stupid enough to say, Iran's not going to spend that on its proxies. It's going to spend on its economy, on its people. How naive can you get a politician of that level?
And the President of the United States, President Biden, has said he doesn't want Israel to hit the nuclear sites in Iran. Don't you think that if they did, and that Iran as a nuclear power was postponed for another few years, that would actually be a thoroughly good thing?
I think Israel has other options for now, though. I think that is really a worst-case scenario, and no one wants any nuclear installations to be held. I mean, the consequences of nuclear radiation...
But isn't it very important to stop Iran becoming a nuclear power, or do you think Iran already is a nuclear power?
I think they're buying time to become a nuclear power. That's definitely on their agenda. How far they are from becoming a nuclear power, I don't know, but that is where they want to go. This is why they want to buy time. This is why the Iranian president went to the UN General Assembly meeting and was so reconciliatory, because Iran wants to buy time. I think we've still got some time before that, Israel has options to resort to.
And is your understanding of Iran, obviously you were born there, what do you think will be the most sensitive things to hit beyond the nuclear sites that are in range of the Israeli military?
Well, as I said, Iran doesn't have the economy, so anything that can further collapse the economy and stop its income, so oil installations, for example, would be devastating to Iran. Which is, again, that's why I'm saying that, we've still got some way to go before hitting the nuclear installation is really the last resort, and I don't think we're there yet. But as long as Iran doesn't have the economy, they won't get into a full, engage in a full-scale war. They will rely on their proxy groups, as they have before, but their proxy groups are being dismantled now as well.
And the Iranian government looks to be, from the outside, a very strong, very aggressive, stable administration. Is that the reality? And what do the people of Iran think about the government that they've got?
The overwhelming majority of the people are against the regime. There's ample evidence for that. But don't forget, even a minority of 5% that are armed and organised and strong can rule the majority of the people. I mean, let's not forget Soviet Union. Only 2% of the population were members of the Communist Party, but they could manage to put that hold on the people. And until the collapse, I don't think anyone could predict when the collapse was going to happen. They looked strong as well. But in reality, they weren't. The economy collapsed. And I think that's what will happen in Iran as well.
And the collapse in the Soviet Union came from the top because Gorbachev ceased to believe in communism and then it all fell away. It doesn't look as if there's any prospect of the Ayatollahs stopping believing in having an Islamic state that will be a very rigorous theocratic state.
There is a lot of internal division within the regime. And the smaller the boat gets that they can jump on, then the more infighting there will be. Don't bank on this facade at the moment that they're strong and they're sort of like united, and they're not. The reason I think the Israelis are getting on top of the intelligence war is precisely because they're exploiting the dissatisfaction from within the Iranian regime, from within the security apparatus.
So they understand what's going on in detail within the Iranian government, within the Iranian security services, and are then using that to their advantage.
Much better than the Western governments, I believe, yeah. They seem to be more clued on about what is going on in Iran, and they're having very good intelligence, it seems.
Wasn't one of the silliest things the West did, that deal with Iran that gave Iran lots of money, which has simply, over the last few years, allowed them to build up their resources? And wasn't Donald Trump right to cancel it?
Well, again, the overwhelming majority of the Iranians supported Trump.
Interesting,
yeah.
right.
So it might be surprising to some of the Western commentators, but they thought that he was the only US president that actually stood up to the regime. But apart from Western governments appeasing the Iranian regime, they've also allowed the Iranian regime to build its influence and its network of outlets within these countries. I mean, recently the Policy Exchange think tank produced an 87-page report on Iran's influence in Britain. 87 pages. And even that 87 pages didn't include all of Iranian outlets within the UK.
So, as I was saying in my introduction, it matters to us. Just a final thought that's occurred to me. It's Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday, and he, of course, was president when there were all those hostages taken in Tehran by the Ayatollah Khamenei's government. Anyway, thank you very much, Potkin, for coming in. In a moment, the Labour Party's benefactor, the noble Lord Ali, is apparently under investigation by the Lord's Standard watchdog. But what does this mean for the Prime Minister, who's now paid back thousands of pounds for his freebies?
This Sunday, join me, Camilla Tominey, for an exclusive interview with one of the most controversial, influential and unique political figures of our time. Boris Johnson will be in studio discussing his new memoir, Unleashed, the gripping story of how he dealt with plotting politicians, problematic princes and a pandemic. From Boris bikes to Brexit and everything else in between. This Sunday at 9:30 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, the first thing on in my mind when I heard about this is, what has this country come to when we're talking about getting kids as young as 6 years old to be jabbed weekly or however often it is, because they are too fat. Where are the parents in all of this? There's three things actually here that are important. Number one is we do not know the long-term consequences of these jabs. So if I had a child and I was going to let them have the jab, I would be feeling like I'm treating them like a lab rat, to be quite honest with you, because we don't know the long-term consequences. Secondly, the manufacturers are clear that some of the potential side effects can be very serious. We're talking about potentially pancreatitis, let's get my word out, and also it lists as a potential side effect thyroid cancer. Arguably, it's called the gamble jab, to be honest with you, because of these potential side effects at the moment. And then thirdly, I come back to the parents. Where are the parents in all of this? Because they are the role models. So it really is about parenting, and it's about parenting from being a role model yourself in terms of being slim and healthy, and not expecting a jab to take your place and other people to take your place. If you have children, they are your responsibility. Think before you breed. The other thing you need to remember with this is, when you stop taking that jab, it is highly likely that you're going to put all the weight back on. Now, the thought of a child of 6 years of age, starting with that jab, conditioning them mentally to live with that jab, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely not on.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Iran and Israel, and your mail mugs have come in. Sandra says, I voted reform. You'd be a great asset to the party, dear Jacob. Well, thank you, Sandra. When you say that Iran is the enemy of the West, I think some people will not realise that it's the Western culture that Iran is a threat to, even a threat to Westernized Muslims. That's a very interesting point. And Gordon says, Jacob, perhaps the West shouldn't have been so quick to execute Saddam Hussein. He at least was keeping Iran under control and stopped their expansionist policy. Could the Reverend Starmer's Ming vase have been shattered into a million pieces this afternoon? Amidst the growing backlash over the Donorgate scandal, the Lord Standards Commissioner announced he was investigating the donor behind the scandal, Lord Ali, for alleged non-registration of interests. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has effectively admitted the error of his ways by paying back thousands of pounds for freebies he had previously gorged upon. Well, I'm joined now by Henry Newman, former Conservative Special Advisor, who now runs the Whitehall Project blog. Henry, thank you so much for joining me. And we've had a further story that Lord Ali gave £62,000 to Baroness Udin to bail her out after she'd been done for fiddling her expenses. It gets murkier and murkier, doesn't it?
It is really quite extraordinary. I think it's been some weeks now that this sort of story has been growing. It started with a few appointments to the civil service that were made through an exceptional route. And those appointments were quite often linked to different donations. Then it was disclosed that Lord Ali had not only donated to Keir Starmer suits and glasses, famously, but also received a pass for Downing Street. And day by day, the story has grown in different directions. We also found out that somebody from Lord Ali's office was seconded into Labour HQ and involved in candidate selection. And today, the story's taken a new twist, as you were saying, with an investigation by the Lords Commissioner into Lord Ali. I think the investigation, as it seems, and we don't know the full facts yet, and we won't for some time, is not into donations, but into declarations. There was a news story relatively recently about the failure of Lord Ali to register with the Lords authorities that he was a director of a company based in the British Virgin Islands. I have no idea if it's related to that or to something different, but it will only add to Keir Starmer's woes. And then, as you were also saying, on his visit to Brussels today, Keir Starmer announced that he was going to pay back some of the money for the freebies and donations that he's received since the election, but not all of it. I think that's causing some confusion. And although he's decided to pay back the money, some of his senior cabinet ministers, as so far, won't be. Angela Rayner was, of course, famously pictured partying in Ibiza, and I'm somebody who thinks politicians should be able to have some time off and let their hair down. But that was that event in Ibiza was a in-kind donation, which was she's just declared worth, I think, £836. If the Prime Minister is paying back the money for his donations in office, why won't the Deputy Prime Minister? And I think it's an example of just the confusion that the new government have got themselves into over this whole question.
Well, I certainly agree with that, and it does seem to me that once you start paying back money, you've got to pay it all back, that you look ridiculous if you say, well, I'm paying back these little bits, but some of the much larger sums I'm still holding onto. And his cabinet colleagues may be a bit miffed because they'll have to pay back too, and they may not immediately have the money to hand. They may not be as rich as he is.
Quite right. And I think I'm somebody who believes that donations have a role in politics. I think it's important. I think we need to have our political parties properly funded. But I think what will stick in the craw of many listeners and many voters is that Keir Starmer is somebody who's preached hypocrisy, and yet it turns out he's been throwing stones from glass houses. And I think that will really irritate a lot of people. And I think it's also important to reflect on the fact that Keir Starmer has talked a lot about restricting outside interests for MPs, making it harder for them to have second jobs. Now, many people don't like the fact that MPs have second jobs, but if you don't want them to have second jobs and you're restricting their ability to receive donations, I think some will say to attract the very best people into politics, we need to pay them more money. And that, of course, that's more taxpayers' money. And that's a very hard argument to run.
Absolutely, that you're so constricting what people can do. But it also looks quite hypocritical if you're saying you can't earn money, but you can be given freebies. Those two don't really go together.
Exactly, and I think it's just this. It's also the scale of freebies that Keir Starmer has been taking. I think £32,000 for suits. It's really an extraordinary amount of suits. If you sort of divide that by the average prices of, say, a Marks and Spencer suit for sort of mid-range, even if it goes to something at the sort of top end of sort of personal tailoring, I still think it's a very large number of clothes. £2,485 on glasses.
Even if you go to Savile Row, £32,000 is quite a lot of suits. Thank you very much, Henry. I'm now joined by my panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. John, let me bring you in briefly on the declarations, because I think you've had a look at what Lord Ali declares, and it's quite complicated.
Well, it is quite complicated, and the Lords don't have to declare all of the specific sums of money and earnings that a Member of Parliament does, but they have to set out all their different interests in general terms. And the registry entry for Lord Ali shows that he has a number of investment companies and other companies, but it doesn't tell you very much about them. But I think now there will obviously be a lot of journalists wanting to get behind that and say, well, can we know what they do and which ones are really important?
But if one were to be sympathetic to a peer, it's not a full-time job. There are lots of them. Your influence isn't the same as a Member of Parliament. And that if you are going to have any well-off people in the House of Lords, they will have complex associations. And therefore, if it is just a minor administrative mistake, we shouldn't get too excited by that.
No, I quite agree, and I don't know what the mistake is, and I'm not making any accusations at all, but I think there's a general point that, given that we want transparency, surely it's in the interests of the peer to set it out very clearly in the register where he gets significant money from, because the purpose, surely, is then that he either declares that very, very carefully in any debate or doesn't go anywhere near that subject, so that there's no suggestion of anything going wrong.
Doesn't Reverend Starmer, paying back some of the money, that's an admission of guilt, isn't it? He's the lawyer. He knows that when you do something like that, everyone recognises that you're bang to rights.
I think you're taking a little bit too much pleasure in this whole furore, if I'm honest with you.
Well, because he was such a humbug about it.
He's clearly failed the private eye test. He's made an error. You could argue that, unlike Big L, when it flashed in 1997 with all that advice and spin, so we couldn't see one thing from another because Alistair Campbell was there with a clipboard, we have a different Labour, unspun, and he hasn't taken advice and he's made numerous mistakes. But I think we should just remind everybody he hasn't actually broken any rules, unlike the current contender and, I believe, leadership for the Conservative race, Jenrick, who granted £1 billion housing development to a man who then subsequently donated thousands to the Tories.
You're saying of Starmer that he's not dodgy, he's just stupid. If you were the Prime Minister, is that really a defence that you would like to have made for you?
I think one could argue that he has a poor political antennae, which I agree is a downfall. It's not insurmountable. He just needs to brick himself in with better advice. And I wish he wouldn't spend so much on his glasses, because for the life of me, I can't see that they're worth £3,000. They've made very little difference to the optics. He looks the same.
All right, but, John, Tony Blair paid back £1 million to Bernie Ecclestone. It came out, he dealt with it. He had an understanding of how to move the story on. Yeah. We've now been talking about this for weeks. It's really damaging to the government.
Well, and this action today is particularly stupid because, as you rightly say, if some of it's wrong, then probably all of it's wrong morally or whatever his reason is for changing his mind on it, and he's landing his colleagues in it. Now we're going to have everybody saying, well, why is that concert ticket not acceptable, but that football match is? Or why were those clothes acceptable and not those clothes? We're told there are going to be new rules. So I presume we're going to have endless debates about this because the other MPs will want a view on it. And we'll have to debate what kind of clothes are appropriate.
My understanding
and what kind of tickets are appropriate.
Was that he gives back that which he has received since taking the office of Prime Minister. That's my understanding. In other words, everything else was to boast to his statesman image.
Not all of that, some of it. But it just makes it look as if you've got to pay all of it back. It's very hard to make that dividing line. And then does Lucy Powell, who I think was second in the list, have to pay back, as Leader of the House, £40,000? The man who's paid off his mortgage and was a KC can probably afford to pay off £100,000. But can the other cabinet ministers? We're going to have to leave that hanging because we've got a statement from a Labour Party spokesman who said Lord Ali will cooperate fully with the Lords Commissioner and he is confident all interests have been registered. We cannot comment further while this is ongoing, dreadful word. Why can't people say continuing? Anyway, never mind. Thank you to my panel. We'll be continuing on the theme of Donagate scandal amidst allegations that the Prime Minister is benefiting from a tax loophole on his freebies that seems to be reserved exclusively for politicians.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, it's going to be a cold night ahead with some frost and fog in places, but generally high pressure is building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather to come. Still low pressure dominating across the south, so cloudier here with some showers, but high pressure in the north is building across the country, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather. Now, as we head into this evening, still some cloud across the south, but it is generally breaking up as we head into the overnight period, so leaving plenty of clear spells. Largely dry, though, still the chance of a few showers just poking into the southeastern coasts. But otherwise, a dry night for many, plenty of clear spells, so it will be feeling cold with some fog in places too, particularly in northern areas. Might just be a little bit slow to clear by the time we reach tomorrow morning as well. So as I say, particularly across Scotland, it will be feeling cold, likely to see some grass frost, may even see a little bit of frost on your cars during the early hours of the morning, and there will be fog in places too, so do take care when travelling. This generally lifting and breaking through the course of the morning, but as I say, there may be some stubborn fog, which is slow to clear. Largely dry across the south, still those showers just feeding into the southeast coast. But as I say, high pressure building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather across the country. There is still the chance of the odd shower across the southeast, but you'll probably be unlucky if you do catch any. Largely dry, plenty of sunny spells and some lighter winds as well. So even though temperatures are generally round about average with highs of around 16, 17 in the southeast, it'll probably feel more pleasant in those lighter winds. As we head into Friday, still plenty of fine and settled weather around, but low pressure is trying to edge its way into the west. So cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. And there will still be plenty of fine, dry weather across the country as we head into the weekend, but we are expecting some more unsettled spells as well. So as always, stay tuned for all the details. Bye for now.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the Starmergate and Donagate and Frockgate, and the mail logs have come in. Christine says, why is he only paying back £6,000? What about the £32,000 for clothes and specs? Hypocrites, all of them. And Robert says, Starmer is tarnished beyond repair, but the trouble is, if he goes, Rayner will step up. She is worse than him. Well, I wonder. I don't know. So should the Prime Minister have to pay tax on all the freebies he's received as leader of the Labour Party? According to some accountants, he should. Robert Salter, a director of the firm Blick Rothenberg, has called for all MPs to be taxed on freebies in the same way the rest of the workforce is. For such a sanctimonious socialist, it seems awfully hypocritical that the Reverend Starmer would so comfortably benefit from a tax loophole. So should the Prime Minister be charged the hefty bill of £50,000? With me now is one of the partners at Blick Rothenberg, the tax accounting and business advisory firm, Matt Crawford. Matt, thank you so much for coming in. This is a really interesting question that we tried to touch on last week. But if at Christmas you tip your dustman £10 and everybody in the street does, those tips are taxable, aren't they?
Indeed they are, yes.
But if you send your politician £4,000 worth of tickets to watch a football match, So far, people think that that isn't.
So specifically on the point of a football match, there is actually a legislative exemption for that. So provision of a entertainment by a third party isn't going to be subject to an employment income tax charge. So that one is slightly different. In terms of gifts in the round, though, you're absolutely right. There is a difference. If one of my business associates buys me a suit to go and see my clients, then that would not be taxable on me. It is simply a business. It's simply a gift between the two of us. There isn't an income tax charge. We could look, however, to the other end of the spectrum. If my employer decided to provide me with a suit and therefore I was being provided with a benefit in kind, there would be a tax and national insurance charge on that provision of the suit. Now, what we've got here, of course, with the politicians is something a bit of a grey area in the middle, because we've got a third party, such as Lord Ali, providing a benefit in kind to an office holder, the Prime Minister. An office is deemed to be an employment for income tax purposes. So that's where it's a grey area. Now, my view is that the way that the law is currently drafted, the way the courts look at this, is that there isn't a sufficient causal link between the provision of a suit or glasses and the office that the Prime Minister holds. In fact, he's had several offices, of course, over the period in question, and you have to pin it down to one of those offices. I don't think you can do that. I think you can only pin it down to the fact that he is Keir Starmer, therefore it is a personal gift, just like with the Chancellor of the Exchequer as well, and therefore it isn't currently taxable.
It's a present.
Correct.
But if I gave you a present of £50,000 and it wasn't out of my normal income, and I dropped dead tomorrow, that would be subject to inheritance tax.
Potentially, there's that's absolutely true. But that's a completely different set of rules around inheritance tax. Yes, you're right. It would be a potentially exempt transfer, but you would have to live for 7 years. Yeah.
Whereas if you give to a political parties are specifically exempt.
Correct.
But if you give to an individual, now we assume Lord Ali's income is big enough that he can give away these amounts, but we don't know about some of the other people who've been making these donations. And what I suppose it's important to try and find out is what is being declared and how it's being treated, or has it just been ignored?
So from what we can see from public records, we know that the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he published his tax return details, or at least a statement giving a summary of that. I believe Keir Starmer's done something similar. I've never seen anything from any politician that's declared stuff around how much they've paid tax on gifts that they've been given. And I still believe genuinely that under the current law, they've got that right. Now, do I believe that that's sensible? Not necessarily, but I do believe that they're right as the current law stands.
But does it depend on intention? So that if I give you £32,000 worth of suits, and I therefore have an intention that I will get something in return, say a pass to Downing Street, have I then bought something? Does that then become taxable?
I don't think that necessarily makes it become taxable, but I do think that it would be something that HMRC would want to have perhaps a little bit more of a look at. Of course, you would have to prove that there was that causal link again between those two things, which I think would be a very difficult thing to do potentially. But I have got clients, for example, who are social media influencers.
Yes.
They are given presents, freebies, things that they want to, for example, the company wants them to demonstrate a particular product or service. If they do that, the revenue will say, and I think rightly so, that they're probably trading, and therefore they should be declaring those amounts on their tax returns. So there is a disparity there.
So if you are trading as a politician and getting money for that, then that doesn't count in the same way as if you were on Instagram and getting money for that, which does seem strange.
It does seem strange, and it's a consequence of the disparity between the employment rules for income tax purposes and the income tax rules for trading. They are different.
Would there be any difference if the money was given to the political party, and the political party then said, look, you're the leader of the party, we need you to have a smart suit and a smart pair of glasses and a smart hairdo. We are paying for that as part of our political campaigning. Is there any ability to do that?
I would say then that there's probably a good argument that what they have provided is a benefit in kind for the office that individual holds as the leader or an important figure within that party, the chairman or whatever it might be. So I think that's pushing it definitely towards the taxable end of the spectrum.
To the taxable end. Correct. And then you get into the complications on a suit. That if I get a suit from GBNews and it says GBNews all over it, it's a uniform and it's not taxable.
Spot on, yeah.
If, on the other hand, it's like this suit and I could wear it to other events, it is taxable.
Exactly right.
And so it's a very complex area. We know HMRC can't answer the telephones and none of them can be bothered to go into the office. Do you think if one of them does get into the office in the next week or two, he or she ought to look into this to see what their real view is and what the tax situation is?
I don't actually think that they should, because I think they should focus their time on the hundreds of small businesses out there that are
who they're not
answering the phone calls to. I think that would be a much better use of time, personally.
That's a very fair comment for Matt to make to end that discussion. After the break, the Tory party conference drew to a thrilling close today, with leadership contenders addressing the membership. But who came out on top?
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Right, up and down the country, many parents are preparing or have indeed already sent their child off to university.
Indeed, but sometimes it can leave parents struggling to cope with the, quote, empty nest syndrome their child leaves behind. So joining us now to discuss how to cope with sending off your sprogs to university, or not so sprogs, is broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Good morning, Lucy. Nice to see you this early. This is a real thing, isn't it? It's our colleague Paul Coitz, our sports expert, describes it as grief, sending your young adults off to uni and leaving the nest for the first time.
Yes, I think grief is the right word, because it's an ending. And it's not just an ending with your relationship with your child. It changes from here on in. But it also is very much about your identity. Your identity as a parent is weakening. You'll always be that child's parent, but you're not going to have the same involvement on a daily basis. And so you're left to think, OK, well, what does my life look like going forward? What's my relationship? If you're in a relationship with a partner, how is that going to change? And like all elements of grief, there's going to be a bit of a process. There's going to be that transition period where you adjust to your new life, just as your sprogs, as you call them, are adjusting to their new, exciting phase of their life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan Tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Finally, it's what you've all been waiting for. It's time for a review of the Conservative Party conference as it drew to a close early this afternoon with the candidates addressing the membership. Here's what they had to say.
And never forget, reform didn't deliver Brexit. We did. Reform didn't cut immigration. I did. And mark my words, we will beat reform by being the best version of ourselves.
I will tell you what a Conservative is. Someone who believes in Britain, who believes in limited government, who believes in free trade and responsibility to others. Now, we are not afraid of the future.
I am for the country of Magna Carta, of the habeas corpus, of the Bill of Rights, defending our own freedoms and liberties. I am for finishing the job that we started with Brexit and restoring to our people and our Parliament its sovereignty.
The Conservatives have to be the party of wealth creation. Wealth is not a dirty word. It supports jobs and families. It pays for our schools and our health service. We should defend it and encourage it.
Well, I'm joined now by my panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, let me give you a first go. You heard some historical mentions there. What did you think of them?
Well, it's very clear who GB News is backing from the way in which those clips were edited. I thought clearly they favoured Robert Jenrick.
Really?
Yes, a little bit there on, was it habeas corpus or the Bill of Rights or something? I mean, almost I was moved to goosebumps. Whereas actually poor old Cleverly, who I actually thought had a very good speech, he was very effective. The authority gap of being a tall male is spellbinding and most unfair for the rest of us. I include you and you in that. Skimpy men in comparison.
For the record, GB News is not allowed to have a candidate.
Well, I'm just suggesting subliminally.
And even I don't have a candidate. I haven't decided who I would be supporting.
I'm not labelling blame here. I'm just saying perhaps on a subliminal level, subconsciously, the man in a dark room editing those clips might have had an antennae that favoured Jenrick, because that was a very favourable clip, whereas I actually thought, in fact, I was staggered by how good Cleverly's speech was. I mean, he said sorry. He owned it. He came on like a true man and fell on his sword. And then, and Jacob, I wondered if this wasn't a small personal attack against yourself. He said that he wanted a more relatable, more normal Conservative Party. Clearly was aware that the right honourable gentleman from Somerset had lost his seat. Now, I thought he was actually sort of avuncular, approachable and not crazy. It reminded me slightly of when Theresa May said we can't be the nasty party anymore. It had that kind of vibe.
Oh, my Lord, that was one of the worst speeches ever made at a Tory party conference with disastrous consequences, because everyone thought she was saying we were the nasty party.
And I think, to an extent, a lot of us nodded and thought yes, and indeed, in the end...
But you'd never have voted for us anyway, and we need to appeal to... That's what I didn't like about James's speech. I thought trying to bash up reform is a mistake. We need to do... Cameron was very clever in some ways. He worked out that you had to love-bomb the Lib Dems, and we should be in the business of love-bombing reform.
Well, I entirely agree with that. And to me, there's only one candidate in it that I would want to see, and that is Robert Jenrick. I think the other three, because they stayed in a government which lamentably failed and turned down all the good ideas that people like you and I gave them as to how we could do a better job for the public, we could get closer to meeting our promises from 2019, and they didn't want to know, and they decided to drive the coach over the cliff. I don't think they found the language to say why they did that or why they suddenly had this transformation. They're now all speaking fluent conservatism.
Yes.
I could agree with most of what each of the four candidates were saying. But they didn't do it, Jacob, when they had the chance.
When they were in office.
That's the problem.
Though, of the performances today, I thought Kemi came across as the most charismatic and gave the best technical speech.
No, I don't agree. I think Cleverly did.
No, she's bombed out.
And I think Jenrick is the one I still favour, and I think Jenrick spoke very well. But I think
Jenrick spoke very well.
I think Cleverly spoke much better than I would have expected. And with the exception of the attack on reform, which is not a wise thing to do, I think he spoke in a way which would engage with more people. So I think what might have happened is we may now have a Jenrick against Cleverly runoff when the MPs think about it all.
Which would be an interesting runoff. I thought Tom Tugendhat's speech was much better than he's been given credit for.
Oh, he was a wet fart. I mean, I'm sorry, really, that he lost me halfway through. I'm not going to pretend I listened to the whole thing. I lost interest. I mean, he was sort of trying to build up that idea of the soldier and the mission impossible, but he didn't have the oomph for the delivery. And I know that some among the Conservatives rather bitchily sneered that he should be in the Lib Dems. And actually, I thought that was doing a disservice to the Lib Dems. On Kemi, as a woman, she blew it when she started havering madness about the maternity leave when we've currently got an all-time low in birth rates. I mean, to the point that we're going to have to start recruiting babies, to be honest, into this country to keep our schools open. No, and I know you dismissed me as someone who'd never vote Conservative, but I am looking at...
never dismiss you.
No, OK, thank you very much. But we are looking at a Prime Minister with a charisma bypass. So you need to match that and beat it. And if you take advice...
You need to do the opposite.
And if you take advice from a bystander, Cleverly has that presence, the X factor. He can employ a Jenrick as his crazy chancellor or immigration minister if he wants to, but he has the standing if you'd take advice.
Cleverly certainly had the best conference, I think, of all the candidates. He did very well. He was the only one to get a standing ovation in the interviews with Christopher Hope, the GB News' very own. So I think he's got a good platform for the MPs.
But we know, of course, that when he was in government, he wasn't able to make the changes to implement the attack on the small boats and the evil trade in people across the Channel.
Well, and it was slightly stretching the facts to say that he'd brought immigration down.
Well, of course, because, I mean, Rishi deserves the credit for finally agreeing with those of us who said you've got to control legal immigration, because that is something we can do.
But he was only Home
this
Secretary
government is
for...
now going to get the credit for that, because it took a little while.
But he was only Home Secretary for 6 weeks anyway.
But he did not take the advice of Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, who had very good legal thoughts about how you could have speeded up the deterrent effect of the Rwanda flights. And so I'm afraid he was not really telling us the truth when he said he'd solved it all.
Now, to go back to Kemi, Tessa thinks the maternity leave thing was a mistake.
Yes.
I rather warm to politicians who make gaffes. I think it shows that they say what they believe in rather than just the script they've been given from central casting. And the fact she made a gaffe or two at the conference, I thought made her, in a sense, a stronger candidate because a more genuine one.
Well, if the gaffe had been something she believed and stuck by, then you could make that defence. But I think it's a totally wrong thing to say and do. I don't know of any normal Conservative who thinks that the maternity leave is too generous or that we should somehow act as a deterrent to people having babies.
It's actually quite balanced.
But she climbed back from it almost immediately and then claimed she hadn't said it, and we could all hear it on the tape. I'm sorry, that was her worst moment. It was a disaster.
And Jenrick had a very good conference.
Yes, he
Lots
did.
of
Very
events, good solid speech.
Can we just go back to Kemi and that gaffe? It was reminiscent of Andrea Leadsom. Do you remember when she was heard on microphone saying, well, of course, I should be the leader because I've had babies and Theresa May hasn't?
She gave it in an interview to Rachel Sylvester in the Times.
She did, and it was an utter disaster. It had a sort of smacked of community council level bitchiness, to be frank, and she was derided and then pulled out. And I thought that you could just even freewheel on the question of maternity.
We've had some foul language which you're not allowed. I'm apologising for the language.
Why did I say something bad?
Anyway, thank you very much to my panel. Up next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, you'll have very civilised language, won't you, on your programme this evening?
I was going to make a joke there, but I won't.
Monday.
I won't. Right, it's a good day for Labour. Lord Ali's under investigation. Starmer pays back £6,000, could be on the hook for £50,000 as well. Angela Rayner's Ibiza DJ Sesh turned out to be a freebie. Oh, and David Lammy told Lebanese people to move back to Israel. So, great geography there. Ed Miliband has just admitted as well that his net zero push could leave us all shivering in the dark with blackouts. Nigel Farage has been vindicated when it comes to a new report showing that some migrants are unfortunately bringing HIV to Britain. I asked whether a cap of 100,000 people a year for net migration is actually still too high. I exposed some shocking BBC bias. And Prince Harry looks much happier on his own. Why is that?
Well, that all sounds extremely interesting, as always. That's coming up after the weather. Michael Ancram, Lord Lothian, died. I owe him a great deal, so pray for the repose of his soul. Without him, I'd have been blocked by Central Office from becoming a candidate for the 2010 general election. He told my association they were allowed to select me, and Central Office couldn't stop them. So I revere his memory. I'll have mass said for the repose of his soul and encourage you to pray for him. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. Good night.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, it's going to be a cold night ahead with some frost and fog in places, but generally high pressure is building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather to come. Still low pressure dominating across the south, so cloudier here with some showers, but high pressure in the north is building across the country, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather. Now, as we head into this evening, still some cloud across the south, but it is generally breaking up as we head into the overnight period, so leaving plenty of clear spells. Largely dry, though, still the chance of a few showers just poking into southeastern coasts. But otherwise, a dry night for many, plenty of clear spells, so it will be feeling cold with some fog in places too, particularly in northern areas. Might just be a little bit slow to clear by the time we reach tomorrow morning as well. So as I say, particularly across Scotland, it will be feeling cold, likely to see some grass frost, may even see a little bit of frost on your cars during the early hours of the morning, and there will be fog in places too, so do take care when travelling. This generally lifting and breaking through the course of the morning, but as I say, there may be some stubborn fog, which is slow to clear. Largely dry across the south, still those showers just feeding in to the southeast coast. But as I say, high pressure building, bringing plenty of fine and settled weather across the country. There is still the chance of the odd shower across the southeast, but you'll probably be unlucky if you do catch any. Largely dry, plenty of sunny spells and some lighter winds as well. So even though temperatures are generally round about average with highs of around 16, 17 in the southeast, it'll probably feel more pleasant in those lighter winds. As we head into Friday, still plenty of fine and settled weather around, but low pressure is trying to edge its way into the west. So cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. And there will still be plenty of fine, dry weather across the country as we head into the weekend, but we are expecting some more unsettled spells as well. So as always, stay tuned for all the details. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Take a year off and keep it to yourself. You don't even need to tell the taxman, as it's totally tax-free. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This Sunday, join me, Camilla Tominey,